and welcome to what is already, feels like it's gone so quickly, but already the final episode of this first series of the Flourish podcast. Al, have you had fun on series one?
I have had fun on series one. There you go. That rhymed.
Did it?
I have
Oh
had fun
dear.
on series one.
Oh dear. Let's stop before you do a really weird, embarrassing rap. Um, yeah, great. We've had fun. We hope you've had fun. We hope it's been helpful. We have been throughout this series exploring the why, the how, and the what of children and youth ministry. And yeah, just unpacking a bit of our story, our thoughts on that. We are landing in the final episode at the what, which is massive, really. So, yeah, Al, where do we start? Where do we start and yeah, to begin to even unpack what just is huge? Because really, we could talk about different aspects of the what for weeks.
We could, yeah,
We're
we
not
could.
going to.
We
So
could do a
what?
whole series just on that.
So what do we? How do we start? Where do we kick off?
Well, funnily enough, it is about the kind of the why and the how in order to nail your what. So it's
Yeah.
being clear with what you're trying to do. So, for example, you wouldn't go into an assembly, which is part of your kind of the what or the activity that you're doing, and do a full-on preach because the context isn't right for that. Neither would you do a deep Bible study at a youth and community group that you're running. So the what has to be tailored to the context that you're doing ministry in. But also, I think there's regular elements that need to feature that are, for me, are the kind of the core of the what. And so having
But
a
I
really
think
good
I think
what
just sorry, just pausing there
for
before you dig into those elements and what the what looks like. I just think that's a really important point, isn't it? It is pretty much the whole reason for the Flourish model. That actually we have landed at the what, and yes, it is big, and there's some really good stuff to unpack and to get into, and it's important. But I think what sometimes can happen is that we jump straight to the what. We jump straight to what the program looks like, what it is we're going to deliver. We go there straight away. That's where we go first. And the problem with that is, like you've just said, if we don't first, like we need to rewind, and if we don't first really explore and understand for ourselves what our why is, and then really think through the how, the what just doesn't hold up. It doesn't flourish. It doesn't have strength. It doesn't land where it's supposed to land. It doesn't happen in the way that is most helpful. So I think that for me is the most important part of the whole
yeah.
flourish model, everything we've been talking about in the last few weeks. And I think, yes, we are getting to the what, but it's really important. Like, it's a little bit of like a warning sign, like, yay, I know this is where we all want to go straight away because we actually just want to get on with it. And I think for lots of us involved in children's and youth ministry, we're activators. So we just want to get on and we want to do. But actually, if we want to do it well, we need to really do our work on exploring the why in the house. So yeah, just to kind of really kind of put a flashing light around that, do it in neon. Like, what's our why? What's our how? And if we've done that work, okay, right, let's begin to think about our what.
And so we haven't talked about team, but some of the what's linked with team, the kind of people that you have available that can join in with what you're doing. Um, but essentially, I would say the what and is driven by a couple of things around your kind of approach in your house. So lots of people have a preference about whether or not they're going to do evangelism or whether they're going to focus on discipleship, whether they're going to do pastoral stuff or whether they're going to do general outreach social stuff. And we all have a preference in terms of our approach to children's and youth ministry, a particular thing that's linked with our values and why we do what we do. So we have to think through how the elements of a program need to touch everything that we're talking about with children and young people, but think about the context that we're doing it in. So if you're, fully committed to evangelism and mission, you might have quite a lot of outreach stuff that you're doing in terms of whether that's kids ministry or youth ministry. So you have to tailor your what to the group of young people that are coming. So how do we meet them where they're at? If they don't know the Bible, they don't have any Christian worldview that they've inherited at all, where do you start? And is it even appropriate in some of those contexts for a what to have a lot of Bible stuff? So it's thinking all of that through and then getting into, okay, I've understood the context I'm in. I've gone through my thinking about my why and my how. And now I'm looking at the what. My key thing would be there are elements that I think help children engage, whether we're doing outreach stuff or whether we're doing discipleship stuff. So it's important for me that these things are included. And for me, that gives us a rich diet of stuff rather than like if you're talking actual food, packed full of carbohydrates or protein or kind of whatever other things are that you would say in terms of food. So for me, elements
So are
include,
you like with that, are you kind of talking about like balance? Like it can't
yeah,
all be one. But are you suggesting in the kind of starting from the why, um, I guess like, I don't know, the eat well plate
yeah, that's it.
springs to mind. Like, and you've got quite a massive chunk, haven't you, on that is going to be carbs, and you've got, you know, a tiny, tiny bit of the stuff that everyone really wants to eat, which is like, you know, chocolate and sweets, like, but that's tiny on the kind of eat well plate. So are you, just to get my head around what you're talking about, are you suggesting that in di like leaning into your why helps you first of all identify the proportions almost of
Yeah, it
those
does.
different
It,
elements?
it absolutely does. So, light touch on some things. If you are doing evangelism or missional work, maybe the balance is a little bit more even if you're doing stuff with kids that have grown up in church or you're focusing in on discipleship or nurturing people's faith journeys. So,
Okay.
but
But
then,
within that, are
but
you then saying, but there needs to be like this mix?
yeah, this needs to
Okay.
be less mix. So
So tell us what
let's
those
get into
elements
some of
are.
those things because
Sorry, I'm like, tell us, and you're like, well, I'm trying to if you just
no,
shut
no.
up.
So, for example, I think one of the most important things we do is to tell a story. So I would say an element is telling a story. Now, with a group of kids that are fully engaged with the Bible, you might do that with the retelling of a drama that they're very familiar with, and you do that together. And that's your way of telling the story. You involve the kids and they tell the story. With another group that maybe you're doing evangelistic work and you're doing outreach work, you might tell a story that alludes to something Jesus did, but it's more an illustration that you kind of unpack and then you say, and in the Bible we find, or whatever, if you're going to link what you're doing with anything that Jesus has done. But the story element's the key. It's thinking about how do we draw kids into a story or young people into a story that is kind of you connecting with their world, helping them identify with some of the things you're trying to talk about. So for me, story's key. How we do it and the what in terms of the way in which that is built depends upon the why, the context, the kids that are present, the age, and all the rest of it.
Nice. I like that. So you're kind of the why is helping you think about your kind of proportions almost. And the how then is the kind of way that you approach that. Okay, so we've had story on our
Yeah,
what. What other kind of things do you think are important parts of our what? I mean, really, we're kind of talking about program, aren't we?
we are a bit.
Kind of thing.
So the elements that need to go into it. So, and I won't necessarily cover all of them, and you'll probably think of some as we go. But one of the other things is creating space for encounter. So I would say that there needs to be stillness or space for reflection. You pose a question and you give some space for it. We need to try, depending on the context, to avoid rhetorical questions. If we're going to ask a question, we need to leave space for kids to think about it. And depending on the age, a rhetorical question is completely missed by younger children. They think you're asking them a question. So it is about thinking things through, but creating space for reflection and posing something that the kids are going to think about at an age appropriate level. And then the time that you give to that, the kind of activity that you might build into that. But I think that creating space for encounter where you're inviting God into that space in some situations. Other places, you're helping kids run into themselves and think, well, they never stop and pause and think about anything. So here's a moment. So in an assembly, I would do that towards the end of an assembly. Here's a question to pose. Let's take 10 seconds to think about it, and you create space for that. And the encounter bit for me there is maybe God does show up and I'm not making that happen. I'm just creating space. But also for some kids, they've never thought about that question. So you're just giving them 10 seconds to think about nothing else but just what you've posed for them to kind of just engage with that. Um, and so often that we kind of, particularly with activity built, kind of the what, we can be so busy trying to entertain, make sure they're happy, make sure they're having fun, that we miss the value of creating space for encounter and
Mm.
not having to mediate everything as the leader to enable stuff, but genuinely opening up space and creating space. It links for me with pace, which we've talked about in a previous episode, and curiosity. It is creating that space for them to wonder and have questions. So for me, story, space for encounter, those two things for me are kind of essentials in any kind of program.
And I feel like we just like whizzed over story really quickly, but actually story is so like, well, both of those things are so powerful, but story is so powerful in so many ways. Like Jesus used story. um, it's a good thing to do. It was modeled for us, but story just builds empathy. It helps kids to kind of claim their own story. It's a bit like foundational in building kind of identity building, and but also in kind of building connection with others as we learn other people's story. And story just like has a way of just getting straight to the heart of it, doesn't
Yeah.
it? It's
And
so powerful.
one of my favorite faith formation gurus, if you like, John Westhoff, said, we're a story formed people. And in that, he's talking about all of us as human beings. And if you think about it, every child that turns up at a group or a session or whatever we're running, whether they be 5 or 15, has a story. They have their own story, stuff that's happened in their lives. They have the story that they're living as they go through their relationships with other people. They have what they think about themselves, which is the story they're telling themselves. Um, and we're inviting them as we engage with them from a Christian perspective into a bigger story to help them see, where do they fit? Stories also linked with, particularly as you go through adolescence, with working out my identity. Who am I going to be? So a story itself is massive. We could do a series
I
on.
literally just said that. No, we should. Let's do it. Yeah, it's really
Um,
cool.
you've got to have stories. So I think
Yeah,
including
yeah.
is key and seeing it as a way to kind of build rapport, build relationship. And where you can, with story, include aspects of your own story as
Mm.
you relate to kids and talk to them. I think sometimes we can feel, I can't be too kind of open about myself. And I think one of the things that kids really love is finding out more about you as their leader. So even when I've done assemblies, I've gone in and I've told a story about things. And I remember once doing an assembly where I shared a picture of us on our wedding day and said, this is my wife I've got married to. This is us on our wedding day. 40 kids at the end of the assembly wanted to see this photo of you, even though they were never going to meet you. It was because I brought it in and it was me talking about, they were like fascinated. And so that's great if you can build those things in, and that's all story, but it is kind of making it real, making it relevant, um, making your own connections with the story. So it doesn't a story you're telling that kind of sits somewhere else as an abstract idea. It's a story that you're trying to live and experience and express in the way that you go about telling it and doing it, and
Yeah.
encouraging kids to kind of wonder. So that builds into kind of creating space after story for reflection as well. So those two things for me go right together.
And that curiosity, that it bubbles up by we're basically creating space and opportunity for curiosity when we create um opportunity for encounter, aren't we? So the two beautifully go hand in hand. Like we're telling story, but we're also creating opportunity to reflect on that. And I think just that whole creating space and opportunity for encounter just reminds me of it's one of my favorite Bible verses, and as I go to say it, I can't actually remember where it's from, but you probably will. About he brought me into a spacious place. He rescued me because he delighted in me. But just that sense of this beautiful, spacious place, and often our programs are packed full. There's very little space. I think probably that's partly because we're a bit concerned. Like, what's going to happen if we haven't planned this minute? That's where the chaos can sometimes happen. So we like schedule the life out of something and don't create those moments to breathe and to be still and those opportunities for encounter. And, that often begins with reflection and curiosity. And so just that, like, yeah, having that space.
I mean, just a slight aside, in terms of reflective practice and thinking about why we do things the way we do. And by that, I mean the way we cram a program with activity. Is that because we think the children aren't ready for this, so I'm not going to do it? Or is it that we're uncomfortable and we're not ready for it? And actually, if we interrogate that a little bit, we're afraid of space and silence. We're not in control of it quite so much. So maybe that's more about us than it is about kids aren't ready. But
Well, and
maybe
I
we need
also
to reflect a bit more about that.
I think there's more in that, isn't there, around like, I think curiosity. We can be fearful of curiosity because what happens if they ask a question I don't want to know about, I don't know the answer to? I think that's particularly true when we're talking about like the Bible and faith. And I think for lots of us, there's a little bit of a fear of, well, my Bible knowledge isn't really good enough, so I'm not going to do it. But actually, what we want to do is create space for curiosity and encounter, and we can do that together.
Mm.
um I think I know it needs brave, we need to be brave in it, but actually if we can be brave and we can be okay with not being the gurus, it's back to guides or gurus that we were talking about when
Yeah.
we talked about how if we're like happy to be guides and not feel the pressure to be a guru, do you know what? It's all right if someone asks a question and we don't know the answer. In fact, it's almost better when that happens. I think I was really aware of that in teaching. So my original training was to be a French and Spanish teacher, which is a lot of kind of like learning vocab. And I think there's a bit of a kind of belief that you kind of have to know the whole of a language in order to be able to do it. Well, you don't, and that's not realistic. And no, we're not going to get to that point. And so, actually, if the way that I was teaching was that I always had the answers, I think what that fosters in the kids I'm teaching is a belief of, well, I'm never going to be that good. And you kind of give up. What's the point? Like, but actually, if they ask me questions and I'd be like, oh, I don't know that, then they can start to understand, actually, I don't have to have all of this nailed in order to be able to have a go at it. And I think that the same is true in our kind of faith thing. Like, by having all the answers without intending to, there's a danger that we can create opportunities for actually a bit of shame in our kids, like, and just to feel rubbish about themselves, like, oh, I don't, my faith doesn't look like that, my faith isn't good enough, they know it all, and that's where I have to get to. And actually, no, you don't, because we all have questions, we all have things that we're working out, we're told to work out our faith.
And
That is what should be happening.
it's okay to build kind of, there's a little formula I have that I use when a kid asks a question and I don't know the answer. So I would always encourage people to say, that's a great question, as you kind of respond, because you want to affirm the child, whatever they've come out with. That's a great question. That's really interesting what you've just said, or whatever it is, your version of that.
Mhm.
And then say, I don't know. That's, and I think that can be really affirming, weirdly, because it's like, oh, okay, my leader doesn't know either. It wasn't a daft question, but then let's find out together, or let's have a think. Where might we be able to discover the answer? What could help us think this through, whilst recognizing there are some things that aren't straightforward. So there isn't always, we found the answer. There are some things that we kind of sit with that we don't know. We won't know this side of heaven. Paul says we see through a glass darkly, and one day we'll see face to face. So there's things that we won't get and we don't know. That's okay. And for me, that builds faith rather than takes it away. So that's really important. We have that kind of engagement as kids ask questions.
Yeah, yeah, so good. Oh, this is great. Okay, so what have we done so far? We've done the importance of story.
Yeah.
We talked about space for encounter. Anything else on your little eat well plate of program and session?
Yeah. So movement. And I don't think movement necessarily needs to be games, although games may feature, but getting up and moving around. And some kids need it because they just can't sit for very long. So actually having a program that is built around sitting at chairs or sitting at tables or sitting on the floor for a long period of time, I would argue for most children is not the most helpful way of kind of running an evening or a session.
I mean, to be honest, I think that's the case, not just for children.
No, well, yeah.
Like we're both on the preaching rotor at our church, and I sometimes stand up for my like preaching slot and just like I'm a little bit in despair of like where I'm coming in the service, and we've had notices and we've had prayer. We've like basically the adults have been sat for half an hour before I then stand up and preach. You're like, man, we're done with the sitting an hour. So I often do a kind of sensory let's move our bodies activity at the beginning of a preach, because I think it's not just a child thing, it's a people thing. We all have physical bodies and we need to pay a bit more attention to that. But
It
for
is, but
kids
because
whose brains and sensory systems are still developing, it's like crucial.
because we're as adults we're compliant generally speaking, we've
Yeah,
learned
yeah.
how to kind of get along with people next to us or what's happening at the front, and we just do it. But it doesn't mean we're engaged. So, that kind of compliance can kind of kid us into thinking, oh, engagement, because they're looking at me. No, they've glazed over. They're not really looking at you, looking through you, and thinking about something else because they've sat there for so long. So, but with kids, it's great that they actually will move to illustrate to you that I have sat here long enough. What are we doing next?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I
movements.
mean, we could again, this I would love to, we could do a whole certainly a whole session, if not a whole series, on just the word compliance and what that means. Like, and we haven't got time for that today. But yeah, I think we sometimes see compliance as like the aim. Like we just need to get them to sit still and listen with the story. But actually, I really am not okay with that. I'm not bothered about it. What we want is engagement, whatever that looks like.
So,
Yeah, but
so
that's like we'll just throw that Easter egg out there and we'll come back to
there you go.
compliance at some point in the
So
future.
movement, let's say movement, and that, for me, that does, games of some sort are great ways of getting kids moving. The game itself isn't the thing; it is the movement, and kind of doing something a bit different and shifting around. Sometimes those games can work, or movement can work well, kind of in team activities, helping kids socialize, do stuff with other people, get to know their group better. Team games are a great way of doing that with kids. Um, there have to be, what I would say is they have to be run really well. So one of the challenges sometimes with a game is nobody really knows what we're going to do. The rules aren't clear. Rules really matter if we're going to do a game well, because some kids will just roll with whatever we're doing. Other kids will get really like, what am I supposed to, what are the rules of this game? And if they think other kids aren't obeying the rules of the game, then actually they're going to vote and be out, or they're going to get really upset about it. So we need to recognize how have we communicated what we're doing, is really
I
key.
think I think you're right. I think particularly like for kind of our neurodiverse kids um who are quite literal thinking and really like to know what the structure is, what the rules are, how does it work. It is super important. But I think it's wider than that, knowing the rules. Like as in I think it comes down to like whether we value something or not. And if we want our kids to value, if we're doing part of our program, it's because we're valuing this as an activity. Um, Whatever the reasons, be them just social, be them having fun because that's a good enough reason. Like whatever the reason for this, we've put it in the program because we're valuing it as an activity. Well, actually, if you're involved in a game and you give it your all because that's good engagement, and you want to kind of really and then at the end it's like or there's kids that are kind of cheating or not fully following the rules, or at the end they go, oh well, you're all brilliant every like you're like what. Like, well, I'm certainly like, what? Well, I'm not going to bother with that activity because you clearly don't are not bothered about it. So if we want our kids to value those bits of the program, we need to show we value them by making them worthwhile. Like the rules have to matter. We have to know what it works like, because I think that means whether kids value something or not.
And I think again, it's like with thinking through inclusion, um, does a game have to be sporty and involve running around? Does it have to be involve being really dexterous, either with your hands or with your feet, in terms of movement? And I think again, it's like some kids will already be feeling anxious if they think, well, I can't do that. And so I'm not sure I want to play this game. So, and it's not saying we don't do some of those games. It's recognizing again with our game diet that we're being thoughtful about have we got a good mix of games over a period of time, not necessarily each evening that we run stuff,
Mm.
but thinking through, okay, each month we have to make sure our games are connecting with kids in a way that means they can access what we're doing and they're not exclusive or, so even things like you've got a game where you've got names and kind of pictures of on a wall. Some kids at a younger end, you may not do that because you think, well, they can't read. But for some of our older kids, they may struggle in terms of literacy and kind of with dyslexia or something. So actually reading a name quickly as part of a game and then running to try and find the picture. For some, they'll struggle with that. So that might be a team activity. They might be really good at spotting faces and knowing who it is, but they can't find the name if it's written down. So, it's thinking through those kind of things with games as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's just thinking through like which is a much much wider thing around fully how do we make what we're doing inclusive, but it's like how do we make every element of it
Yeah.
inclusive? Do we think through that? Do we bring a bit of curiosity to like, oh well, if I struggled with this, how what would that look like for me? And but again, yeah,
Where
huge topic.
are we? So we're
I
story.
feel like what we're doing is just creating more questions,
We
but
are.
that's good, isn't it? It's good to think through what we're doing.
So story, space for encounter, games.
Or
It's
movement, you said, not
or
game.
movement. Yeah, I said movement. And I think the other
That's
thing I would say
good.
is make something. So and that could be they're helping you with the story. So you're making the drama together and there's an engagement or they're participating. But rather than thinking through an evening where literally everything is you're delivering it and they just do it, where in the evening is there space where they're contributing and making it happen? So the make it.
Hmm.
So make it movement. Oh, I'd love to do M's for everything, but I can't think of an M for story. But anyway, um, yeah, thinking that through. So what does it look like for them to make
We
it?
need to leave that because I could sit here going, oh, like what could that M look
We've
like?
done
Anyway,
make a movement.
parking. We're parking
Okay.
that
Parking.
because it's good enough. And I think that whole kind of make it thing around being like we're almost talking about how do we invite them to be co-creators with this thing
Yeah.
that we're doing. And actually, I think that isn't some that can be physically like a creative activity. It can be like you said, helping create the story, creating the discussion, that kind of, but that create element is an important thing. Like we're made in the image of a creator God, like creativity, like oozes in, like we just see it all over creation. And that's the image that we're made in. And I don't know that we always value that kind of creative side or create space for it or encourage it. And it's like it's in us and it needs this outlet. So how do we create that opportunity? That's yeah, great.
Um,
Anything else
and
on the
then
plate?
on
I'm
the
loving
make on the plate, two things that I think are really important is how we start and how we finish. So if I take the assembly as an example, what's your drawing them in? Kind of what's the one thing you're going to explore? And I think again, sometimes when we think about having a theme for an evening, we can be too busy with what we're trying to do. And there's four or five things that find their way into our theme. And then the kids are like, what is it we're talking about tonight? I've no idea. So trying to do one thing, but then kind of your kind of invitation into kind of the start of the evening. So you might have general kind of engagement activities for kids as they arrive. There's a register, there's stuff that they have to do. They go and join their group if there is a group. And then there's some activity that they can join in with. And there's a choice rather than kind of it's this or nothing. So making sure there's that for kids. And then a kind of gathering thing. So how you do that is really important. Get everyone together. That might be a song, it might be something else that we do, but we gather them and we set out kind of where we're going for the evening. Now, sometimes those things don't happen well. So kids are left not being sure what we're doing tonight. And that kind of, so that's about our
it.
structure and the shape of what we're trying
Yeah,
to.
I was going to say effectively what you're talking about there is structure. I don't know that it necessarily always needs to look like we're going to gather at the beginning. But what you're talking about is we need to have clarity around our structure. And I think that is super important. So I guess on the kind of what stuff, you've given us this really lovely, I love it, plate, kind of eat well plate of our diet and our program. And I guess the stuff that I'm bringing with Wonderful Me is kind of looking at how do we do that in an inclusive way? In each of those elements, how do we bring tweaks to our approach really that means that everyone can be part of that in a way that works well for them. And so I guess one of the main thing that or the starting point that we look at in that is structure, and being clear about your structure. So things like visual timetables, like that's really important for kids with neurodiversity. It's really important for children who may have experienced trauma, who basically have learned that the world is not always a safe place. And so if you don't know what's coming next, that doesn't feel safe. And how do you trust that it's going to be okay? Whereas if you are really clear with your structure in some way, and a visual timetable works really, really well that just states this is our space, this is how it works, this is what's going to happen throughout the night. It's like you kind of see children in that space, like breathe into oh, okay, like I know what I'm doing. I mean, to be honest, I think it's important for adults. I think it's really interesting to note that I've had lots of conversations with people who are like adults who are neurodiverse who in some ways almost prefer a kind of liturgical approach to worship because with liturgy you know what's coming, like it's very clear, it's very set out, and you go into kind of like a freer church space and you have no idea what's going to come at you. um but actually I think even in that freer space we could get better at articulating what's going to happen when, helping people build expectation and know what's happening. So I think that kind of gathering is about good structure. Is where the kind of how merges with the what.
Yeah.
Um, because I guess the visual timetable is your what. This is an action that we're going to do, but we're going to do it because why we understand that there are kids that are neurodiverse or who've experienced trauma in our setting, and how is we're going to create good structures because we know that that's what helps them feel safe. But
And
yeah.
I think with finishing, the challenge is like, so sometimes we're just not in charge. So if you are doing a kids club within a Sunday service or junior church, you may not be in charge of when you finish, in the sense that church leaders preaching, deciding what they're doing with the adults, and the adults are going to come and collect their kids when that's finished. So you may not go back into your service, or you may, but it's not up to you when that happens. So having a good finish, we can get into that a little bit. There should be a little bit more discussion about what that looks like. But say, for example, you just finish and it falls off a cliff because the parents are there waiting to get their kids, and the morning has finished as far as the adults are concerned. Everybody's having coffee now, so we're come to get our kids. So how do you make sure that what you really want to finish well with, you do, and you build in a bit of buffer time, because you think, well, the service often, there's this, so there's a little bit of kind of downtime maybe afterwards, but you finished where you wanted to finish, rather than you fall off a cliff and you think we haven't said the key bit or whatever it was. So again, that's linked with structure. If we haven't built it in, and we run out of time or we run over or whatever, we can miss those things. The same with a midweek kids club. If the parents are turning up to kind of collect their kids, we need to honor that, and we need to think about how we're finishing well. And so often I've been part of things where we run out of time and we just finish. So there isn't time to do some of the things kids normally expect us to do before we're done. So again, that comes down to how the evening's running. Is there something we need to cut because this is really important that we finish here? So the important bits just need to not be shoved out the way because we've got to go. So,
Yeah.
and that all is linked with the kind of the how and the kind of our approach and kind of what we value. And I'm not saying that things like games and craft are fluff, but it might be we've added 3 games and actually we only needed 2 this evening. The extra game has meant we're going to miss out time to pray at the end, or advertise something important that's coming up that was key because it's coming up in next less than 2 weeks and they need to know. Or so it's just making sure
Whatever. Yeah, yeah.
we finish well. So starting well, finishing well, story, um, um, space to wonder and ask questions, What else I say? Movement.
Movement.
Those for me, they just need to be the elements that we come to again and again, and they're part of what we build regularly in terms of our what.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. We've unpicked a little bit of your brain, I feel, in this session. So it's an interesting place.
Yeah. Not a place you want to hang out for long, but yes, there we go.
So this is it. This is the final episode of the first season of the Flourish podcast. We've had fun. We quite like just chewing the cud, talking about all things children's and youth ministry. So we will continue to do it. And hopefully there'll be more seasons, unless this bombs, and then we might think about it and just keep it to ourselves. But the plan is to
Well,
that we will do another season coming in the future.
so before we finish, have we got a takeaway that would be helpful for people?
Yeah,
So
this is probably your bit.
I know this is normally my bit, so I'm just wondering if you have a takeaway. But thinking about what we've shared, what we've talked about, what might be your takeaway for people to just ponder?
Yeah, well, I think you've given us a lot of meaty stuff to think through just with that kind of we keep calling it the eat well plate. I now want to like really create this as a tool and shape it properly with some good like language around it. But the equivalent of the eat well plate for our program, that I think just thinking through those different sections, that's a really, really good kind of, there's lots of meaty stuff to just sit on. We can take that away and we can really unpack it and think it through. I guess kind of bigger picture, as we've been really digging into just the Flourish model over the last few weeks together, just a kind of a bigger takeaway and thing to think through and ponder. The whole Flourish model is around creating safe spaces and bringing safe approaches that enable every child that we're journeying with to feel safe, to feel seen, to feel heard, to flourish as they have opportunity to encounter Jesus and journey with him. But I guess also there's a thing around what does our flourishing look like, and we can use that model as we think about our why and our how and our what, for ourselves personally, um, to really kind of enable us to flourish in what we're doing, because that's equally important. Like that's why we are created and made to enjoy God and love God and enjoy him forever, is the whole Westminster Catechism, isn't it, of the reason for us to be as people. So what's our why, like in our own personal lives, in the role that we are doing as people, have we really explored what our why is? Um, and then how are we going about it? What's important to us? Um, and then we get to the kind of what we're doing. But is our what and what we're doing aligned with our why and our how? Because sometimes we fall into things, and this is what we're doing. And if we really spend some time thinking about our why and our how, it's maybe not so aligned. So I guess just an encouragement to think through that Flourish model with a kind of lens of what does it look like for us and ourselves, and actually, helpfully, because the Flourish model is something that I'm working on as a project at the minute, to kind of create a 5-6 week, I guess, kind of training course, really digging into it in depth. Al and I together, we've created this a values resource, haven't we? So that is nearly live. So if individually you want to think about, in fact, by the time this goes out, it might be live. If you want to think about your why and your how, we've come up with a resource called My Values that really kind of talks you through a little process of really thinking about that, the different aspects of your values, what are you passionate about, what's your purpose, what's your personality, how do you go about doing things, and so yeah, that's coming. Keep an eye out. We'll shout loud when that comes out, but it's there if you want to really reflect on your why and your how for yourself personally in ministry. Sorry, that was a
That's great.
waffly take home, but with a little shout out promo.
That's great. And then, so that's it. We're done for this season, series, whatever we're calling it. And we will look to be back. We've got so much that this season has made us think about for what could come in future seasons. Should anybody be watching this, look out for that to come.
And
So,
also, I think so. We've got some thoughts, haven't we? We have kind of brainstormed where do we go next. But also, if as you're listening, there are things that come out that are just like, do you know what? I'd really like space to explore that a little bit more. Then get in touch if there are aspects around children's and youth ministry that you just really like unpacked a little bit more. We are always happy having a conversation, going, what do we think about that? What does it look like? So yeah, get in touch with thoughts and suggestions as well for things that we can explore together. But thanks for listening. Thanks for sticking with us to the last episode. And if this is the first one you've watched, then shoot back and explore the rest of the Flourish model. But we will see you soon.
yeah,
Thanks, everyone.
thank you.